Well, welcome back, folks. Of course, this is Crisis in Flint, Michigan. My name is Richard Hairston. Dr. Deirdre Wilcoxon, she's here with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Richard, for having me.
She's kind of my security blanket.
That he drags around on the floor. Right. Throw in corners, let the dog sleep on it.
Oh, my goodness. Not nice. But I have to be one of the most fortunate men because I do sit between two wonderfully brilliant women,
Oh, you do?
accomplished women.
Oh, wow.
Of course, yours truly, and of course from Flint, Michigan, Mrs. Lena McGee Harvey. Thank you so much for
So
being with us.
insightful.
Good morning, and thank you for having us.
It is also always very special. We get so many positive responses from folks in the community, and they're talking about they really get another perch and view of what's going on in Flint with you being here. So again, I want to thank you for taking the time to be a part of this.
Well, we certainly thank you as well for being able to share the information with so many different individuals.
Well, we think it's important. Of course, I've said it so many times that Flint will probably, the crisis in Flint is going to go through this process and will be knocked off the front pages like we've seen. I mean, there will be stories that will be buried along the way, and we've seen a variety of them. I think I read maybe from a couple of weeks ago, NAACP is doing a lawsuit, which is kind of interesting, a lawsuit, and they were talking about specifically the fact that state employees were protected from this lead-laden water while citizens were abandoned from any cautionary kind of warning to not drink the water. I guess there are so many angles that this thing approaches. Do we know anything about maybe where that lawsuit is? Have you heard anything about it at all, Mr. McGee Harvey?
I am actually familiar with it. I sort of kind of have a relationship with the president, the chapter here, Ms. Gilchrist, and Mr. A.C. Dumas. And so I'm very familiar with it. As to where it is, I'm not really sure. Do you hear the echo?
No, you're coming across perfectly here.
Clearly.
Okay, so where it is, I'm not actually sure. What's really interesting is that the cover-up went even to the city hall. At the time that the state was protected and they were bringing in bottled water, they were also bringing city hall. But many of our residents was drinking. And so for all of the listeners out there, they're going to be running for the next day on RT News, the Christ Flint. So it's important to kind of get a timeline of what actually transpired. This morning it came on probably about 6:30, and I was supposed to air today at 8 and tomorrow at 8 p.m. So we want everyone to watch that if they're able to watch it on our.
And that's good. Could you say that again? Because I'm thinking you're breaking up a little, and I'm wondering if we have a bad line.
You know, I probably would break it up because we're actually gathering for a water giveaway as well as hand sanitizers. Believe it or not much has changed in the city of Flint. Just 1 second. Let me try something different. Just 1 second here.
It is rather sad. Was reading even an article.
Okay, is this much better?
It is sounding yes. That sounds good.
Oh.
And you
Can you
saying
hear me?
yes, and you're saying that not much has changed.
No, that was a question I had the other day. For residents, not much has changed. But we're not talking about, as you were talking about the cameras, we're not talking about the bureaucratic aspect of it. We're not talking about what the governor is saying and the arguments that are ensuing. What we're talking about is people still having to being compelled and mandated to go and pick up water. We're talking about elderly people. We're talking about now high levels of chlorine in our water. We had a press conference with the mayor yesterday as relates to now our water. We're not getting chlorine deposits in certain parts of the city. And so now there's another fear of Legionnaires' outbreak as well as bacteria. So we are really worse off today than we were yesterday,
And
except that we had 4 or 5 water camps.
and it's kind of interesting because I guess the prescription was that maybe more water, maybe more chlorine needed to be added to Detroit water, and then there was the fear that if they added more chlorine, then it could continue, it could begin to leach away the coating that had been accomplished thus far, and I guess therefore there was a hold on the chlorine, and mind you, chlorine is a sort of a purification.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And this is why we really are here. It's because of the chemical cocktail that was created to actually treat the water that came out of the polluted Flint River Reservoir. And so what it did was stripped away the biofilm inside of all of the pipes. So we're talking the infrastructure from the street to the curb, and then from the curb to the home. And so regardless of where we got water from, we were still going to have lead. We were still going to have PTHMs, which cause constancy.
Trihalomethanes, and I guess what that represents, folks, is a class of bacteria, I guess it is, that actually forms as a result of, I guess, the degrading of these natural products, and I guess it could be from waste to leaves to you name it. But again, the problem still exists. It was reported also that the mayor was also asking citizens to get involved in the regimen that really was recommended by, pleaded to Flint residents by the governor, and that is to continue to run this water. And I guess one of the other plans that they were working with is that the reservoir of water that exists, I guess, in some area, that they were wanting to actually deplete that reservoir so that they can get more circulation of water, because I guess that's part of the problem. If they're going to add more chlorine, then it could have a very negative effect on water that's stagnant and water that has been sitting for quite a long while.
Absolutely. And in the press conference, the EPA came in, and there is a special piece of equipment that needed to be purchased. And I think the deadline is June 10th, which is Friday, to be placed into our water treatment center to handle and to actually send out chlorine in all aspects of the city. Because what's happening is binding, and because the water is not running, that we're not getting it in every area. So we're getting an accumulation of bacteria in certain areas now, which is very, very dangerous, because I think so thus far we've had 12 deaths in Legionnaires' disease. And so now we're going to get into temperatures of 80 and 90 degrees, so we'll be right back where we started from.
How does heat, and I'm sorry, Dr. Wilcox, but how does heat sort of factor into creating this sort of negative environment as it relates to this bacteria and other problems?
One of the things that we were just talking about when you're talking about the TTHM in the organic manner is that a lot of times when you heat lead, and that's why they say do not heat lead, because it's the vapors that come from the lead. And so when we're taking showers, a lot of times people will tell you, don't drink the water, don't drink the water. One of the things that we educate about is inhaling it into your lungs is even more of a detriment, because at least when you drink the water, the liver kind of works as a filter. But when it goes into your lungs, it goes directly into your bloodstream. So we're talking about some danger here now.
I just wanted to point out, Ms. McGee Harvey, that the Renaissance Observer, the paper that I published to our credit, we pointed out months ago, back in October, that the state of Michigan was actually bringing water into state offices, and they weren't drinking the water in Flint. And that's one of the reasons that I said early on that the governor knew more than he was letting on to, and he knew more of the dangers associated with lead. But I think you're right in terms of the research that I've looked at. The steam or the vapors coming from the water in Flint can be absorbed into the skin and it can be inhaled through the nostrils and through the mouth and can end up inside the body, as you warn. And as it relates to the chlorine that the federal government is saying that the city has until the 10th of June to make certain is in its water, is trying to make certain, as you indicated, that it reaches all of the city's infrastructure. What they're doing right now, they're not certain as to whether or not all of the water is being treated. So when it comes to chlorine and the addition of chlorine, part of the problem is, when do you add it and how much do you add it? And none of these questions can be scientifically answered with any degree of certitude. So you're right. Flint is at a very dangerous point right now, and I applaud you for being our resident expert in the city of Detroit, and I certainly applaud Mayor Weaver for telling people that it's not over in the city of Flint, and Flint still has to be a priority in people's thinking and in their planning. And that's one of the reasons that when you and I were talking about the reporting on the Flint water crisis, was that we wanted to make certain that we did everything that we could to make certain that the city of Flint and its water crises was not something that the state of Michigan could push to the back burner the way they've done Legionnaires and say, well, you know what, these people died, but we're not certain whether they died from Legionella or not. And I think that they were prepping themselves to be able to make the same assessment as it related to the city of Flint. They were prepping themselves to say 10 years, 15 years down the line, or even 5 years when these children have an inability to read or to cognitively develop properly, to say that, well, yes, there was lead in the water, but there were a lot of other factors going on in the city of Flint as well. So we don't know which to attribute it to. We now have the state clearly on the hook for poisoning children in the city of Flint with lead. So if we don't accomplish anything else in Flint, I think that is a monumental accomplishment.
But you think about the similar poisoning episode that occurred in Washington, D.C., and had some of the same characters some of the same principles were actually involved in uncovering some of that. But 10 years afterwards, they discovered that there was a spike in miscarriages. And I shudder to think that we're going to, 10 years down the line, still have these kinds of negative results. And people would not have been compensated or even made aware.
And that's why we have to thank people.
And I appreciate the Renaissance Observer, because you also pointed out that the boil water alerts, which is really tied into what you were just talking about, there were a couple of boil water alerts that really exacerbated the problem surrounding.
Exactly. But we have to thank people like U.S. Representative Cummings, who has said in unequivocal terms that the residents of the city of Flint need to be compensated. There needs to be a fund set up to make certain that the residents are compensated. So again, this is not Katrina. This is not Katrina. This is being dealt with in a methodical manner wherein the public discussion, and I think perhaps Katrina, as unfortunate as it was perhaps a precursor for Flint, so that people would get into the thick of this conversation and say, wait a minute, we are not going to allow another American city to be lost. We're just not going to allow it. So Flint benefited from Katrina, Detroit benefited from Flint. We are just in a very beneficial place right now.
You said, Mrs. McGee Harvey, that you were at a place right now where you are distributing hand sanitizers and water?
Yeah, we're going to get started probably within the next hour and a half, and we do that randomly throughout the city. So that's not uncommon, I think we have like 432 churches here, so it's not uncommon for every day someone to be doing that to assist. I think what's interesting is I am, and I have always been, very health conscious, and everything that I eat, everything that I consume, environmental from that perspective. And certainly when I turned 50, I really became conscious. What we're not looking at, and I think Dr. Wilcox can attest to this, is that these plastic bottles that are sitting in the sun now that are being distributed. We're talking about carcinogens. We're talking about breast cancer for women in the next 2 or 3 years at unprecedented numbers. We're not looking at the totality of the damage that is going, the aftermath that's going to take place. So now you have tens of millions of bottles of water sitting in the sun, and I'm sure that these bottles of water fall below, are higher in terms of the PVC 7 that's mandated for it to be safe. So we're going to run into a lot of issues down the road, and that is one of my major concerns now.
Well, you were talking about a petroleum product,
Yes.
these plastic bottles, and there have been some cautions, certainly warnings concerning. Again, this is a gas product. This is an oil-based product,
And
and
Ms. McGee Harvey is correct. The reports are abundant in that you don't even want to drink bottled water. If you've left a bottle sitting in your car, for instance, and it's gotten warm, you want to discard that water. So for water to be sitting in the sun in the city of Flint is an unacceptable approach. First of all, one of the things we do know is that a basement will keep things far cooler than anything above ground. So the water should at a minimum be in a basement, but it really should be in a refrigerator or something along that line. You don't want to freeze it either, because there's a damaging impact to freezing the bottle in terms of the gases oozing out as well. But you want to make certain that it's in a cool place, and you certainly, under no circumstance, would you want that water sitting in the sun. That's just completely unacceptable behavior.
I mean, this is
It should be discarded if it's been sitting in the sun, because you.
And what I know for certain is that when you go to many of our water distribution sites, much of that water sits outside overnight. The temperatures are back up at 70 and 80 degrees, and that water sits in the sun.
No.
And so that is a great concern of mine now, is that we're talking about all kind of cancers 2 and 3 years down the road.
That's amazing. And well, we've received the caution from a water expert, actually bottling water expert, that actually talked about individuals who, once you open one of these bottles, then it becomes like a magnet for bacteria. And so if you're not consuming water, but you're just allowing open bottles of water to sit in room temperature, then that's also a problem. So you're talking about problems and potential additional grief upon grief. It is just it is just amazing that 3 years now, we're approaching 3 years, that we're still talking about the same kinds of things. We have a number of callers on the line. And can we get to them?
I think so.
I appreciate that. Good morning, caller. You're on the air. Hello, caller.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for calling.
Yes, when I'm hearing this, I'm hearing genocide. I'm hearing warnings of it. And I've been hearing it for over about 2 years now. And I'm really tired of hearing it. I want to talk about how do we fight this thing. Flint is shut down already commercially, but Flint has cars. And if Flint came to Detroit, because it's a statewide problem, and what's happening in Flint concerns us also. And if Flint got problems, and they got billions of dollars developing downtown, that's also creating a new a racist town in Detroit, I think we all should join together. And we should stop it, and not only that, stop the development down there and stop the poisoning and killing of the people of Flint. Let's shut down Detroit. Detroit will shut down the state. It will shut down economies in the country. Let's fight, Miss McGee, and I give you my number. You can call me. Area code 313-721-8384. Let's fight and stop it.
Again, Tyrone?
Tyrone,
313-721-8384.
Thank you so much. I
Okay, now.
appreciate it, and I will be giving you a call, Mr. Tyrone. And thank you so much
Okay,
for your
now.
call.
Good
One of
morning,
the
caller. You're
things
on
that
the air.
has
Good morning,
caused
Richard.
a lot of distress and a disheartened spirit for myself is to look at the issues that these are egregious crimes that we're talking about. And when I look around in our city, we're talking about people who have taken a lackadaisy kind of sentiment. We're talking about people who pretend as though it is not in existence anymore. And what is an issue of mine is when I woke up this morning, the first thing that I thought about, and I don't know why it came to my mind, is that many of our silent politicians and our silent pastors don't even live in the city. So, you don't hear the cries. And I was telling a group of my peers, my age, that we have become, we're the reapers of what took place in the 40s and the 50s. And we have become docile. We have never stood, my age group have never fought for anything. And Coretta Scott King said, each generation must fight for its freedom. We have not fought for anything. We have reaped what was done in the 40s and the 50s, and we became complacent. We thought we had arrived when we not. We thought we had found freedom when we're not. And when you look into the urban communities, when you look at the number of churches that we have, when you look at the representation that we have put in place, none of it seems to be working and representing us. And so I told them, if this had been in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, Flint would be shut down. It would be shut down. This would be unheard of. But we have become so complacent. I'm comfortable. I have my Lexus. I have my Cadillac. It's not my problem because I live on the edge of Flint. But you're not concerned about your grandmother or your aunt or your children or your sister. And that's what, when you look around our community, that's what you see going on.
It is just amazing when you look at that spirit of protest, and not just protest with boots on the ground. But also the names like Thurgood Marshall,
My hero.
who actually fought civil rights battles all the way into the Supreme Court,
Yes.
and just the level of protest, and those folks. I've been in. If I've been in a one march, I think over the last 10 years, I've actually been in 10 marches. I mean, we're talking about marches and protests, and it has to be at least 10, surrounded the emergency manager, maybe even one or two of them also what was a informational gathering and march. They had to do with Flint. But there were some severe limitations of the number of people that came out. And quite frankly, it looked like 10% of us that were there were on walkers.
I think Ms. McGee Harvey has hit on an excellent observation, and that is that our generation has not assumed the mantle, and we did get comfortable, and we are the direct recipients of the activists in our community who made for monumental change. I think where we are right now, though, is a wake-up call, whether we want to be awakened or not. People are slapping black folk in the face left and right. It doesn't matter whether it's schools or jobs or college admissions. It doesn't matter. Everything that we think we acquired is being snatched from us as if we never fought for it in the first instance. And Ms. McGee Harvey, before you came on, I was talking about the fact that unfortunately for the African American community, our reality is that we have to fight in every generation. No other ethnicity in this country has to continue to fight. They fight and then they're done. They become Americans, full-fledged Americans, and they live out the American dream. That does not happen in our community, and we have to be realists and understand that that is not the case. You all are no different from us. I've said this to you a number of times. When it comes to our pastors, most of them don't live in the city of Detroit. So when it comes to discussing Detroit issues, they tell us how much they love Detroit, and they don't contribute to our tax base, though. And they're not at our school board meetings fighting for our issues, and they're not making our issues their issues. And I respect the pastors in this city. I really do. But the point of the matter is there's something to be said about that quote-unquote skin in the game. Direct skin in the game is something that unfortunately our intelligentsia, that Tyrone that you just spoke to a moment ago, is quick to bash all the time. But there are those of us who love our community and who want to make it better. And as a result of that, we wouldn't leave it. You couldn't take us from it kicking and screaming. So, but there's that other faction too that will not stay with us, will not stand with us, will not fight with us.
You know, I would be admonished for this as well. I look at what happened in Ferguson, and quite frankly, it did not become an emblazing issue on cable media and then all of these local media outlets throughout the country, quite frankly, until they had to seriously consider this threat of violence. I don't believe that there would be 6 police officers indicted, irrespective of what the outcome is going to be. Two have already been dealt with. I don't believe that situation would have occurred if there was not this threat of violence. Now, I know that people will decide how they want to protest if they decide at all. But when you're faced with a situation like Detroit Public Schools, for example, that under the push of the dollars from the DeVos family and this conservative Republican leadership that we are pretty much under the thumb educationally here in Michigan, it just looks as though we have moved away from enlisting folks who are prepared to walk, who are prepared to fight legally, and who are prepared to lay their lives down for some of these issues. And I know that will make a lot of people nervous, but I think it's all relative and important when you consider how egregious, for heaven's sakes, this is genocide that we are looking at in Flint.
And not to mention, when we talk about, not to mention, all of it was done because certain people, certain elitist groups decided that they didn't want to pay for their own investment. That is why we are here.
My
It
Lord.
was not to save money. If you remember when Attorney Chet was on the radio show last week, on the show with us last week,
Yes.
and he talked about the different scenarios and the different options that the governor had when he sent the EN in. There were 4. And this decision was not made switching from Detroit water over to Flint Reservoir to save money, but it was made because they did not want to pay for their own investment. Well, why not take people who are docile, people who don't have representation, pastors who are docile? Why not take an urban area where they believe the people are not learned, and let's make them pay $500 or $600 million for the next 30 years, and let them pay for our water line because it doesn't belong to them. Let's take it from them, and let's have them to build it. We will create jobs, and we'll make sure every community, every outside community benefits from the building of that, except for the people who had to pay for it.
Your
And
situation
nobody has a problem with it.
Your situation, again, is not unlike ours. Our tax dollars are being siphoned out in Detroit Public Schools, siphoned out from our downtown, siphoned out from our neighborhoods, and we have virtually no voice in how these monies are being expended. But we are responsible for paying for all of these things. There was a millage that we passed in the city of Detroit in 1999, $1.5 billion to build new schools, which meant if we built new schools with $1.5 billion, that meant that all of the money coming to us from the state at the time in terms of revenue sharing could have gone more directly into the classroom. So there was a plan. There was a plan to make certain that Detroit school kids were educated in the best of facilities and got the best education that they could receive. Then fast forward to 2009, there was another millage that was placed on the ballot, and many of us say that we didn't vote for it. We say that it didn't pass, but that's another discussion for another day. But that passed, and that was another $500 million, as you point out, Richard. That's $2 billion, of which we have not seen any benefit from. When the new schools were built, the governor of the state of Michigan, Rick Snyder, turned those schools into quote-unquote EAA VA schools, a separate district from ours. Our tax dollars. We are going to work every day to pay for schools that our children cannot go to and call their own. So your situation is not unlike ours. They saw, I think, an opportunity to come in and to rape and to pillage and to siphon off the assets of the city of Detroit, and that's exactly what was done. You cannot contrive a bankruptcy and simply because you are in control of contriving it, persuade me that it was necessary. You can't persuade me that the city of Detroit could not manage her own affairs. You cannot persuade me in light of the fact that the unions were not prepared to give the governor $300 million in concessions. So what happened to the city of Flint was contrived, just like what happened in the city of Detroit was contrived. The difference in contriving all of these unfortunate, heinous episodes right now is the fact that we have the ability to talk about them, wherein we didn't before.
That's so correct.
Deputy Chief, I guess maybe we should coin, maybe there's a new term, pimping politically, because these folks, they have really raped these systems. On one hand, you had Jennifer Granholm, who does a study that says African-centered schools perform better than most public schools. And then you have the Detroit Public School Board that says, well, let's change and make Detroit Public Schools an African-centered school. I even heard recently where African-centered schools are still the preeminent ones that are effective in really educating black children. It is just extraordinary how all of this scholarly information is out there, and no one seems to be heeding it, Deputy Chief.
Okay. Deputy
Chief, hello, Deputy Chief, are you there?
Yes.
When we think about
Good morning, Richard.
the state of Michigan, and we talk
Hello?
about Pontiac,
Hold on,
we talk
Deputy
about
Chief.
Hamtramck or whatever, there was a pattern that was created. It was laid over all of these urban areas, and all of the assets were extracted out. And the saddest aspect of it all is that we did not fight for it. We're not standing up for it. We're comfortable. We're probably being paid a little under the table to turn our head and to pretend that it does not exist. And so anybody who does not protest injustice in whatever manner they decide, you become a part of that injustice.
I agree. Deputy Chief.
Yeah, good morning, Richard.
Good morning,
and
sir.
And your very astute caller from Flint, Miss McGee.
Morning.
I'd just like to make this announcement, Richard, that tomorrow...
Well, tomorrow between 10 and 11, you're hosting Progressive Talk.
Progressive Minds, which is myself and others. I'm hosting Progressive Talk. And the focus of the show will be the Detroit Land Bank and demolition scandal in Detroit and the FBI SIG-top investigation of the hardest hit funds. Okay, we've got so many people in Detroit facing foreclosure that it's a shame that we have a mayor who have collected $260 million in Detroit for blight, and not one dime has been collected for people facing foreclosure, for which this hardest hit fund was established for. And so, yes, we have to keep the pressure on Snyder. We must keep Flint in the forefront, but we must also keep Detroit in the forefront because, again, like everyone know and have said since Coleman Young, when Detroit fell, the whole state fell. And so there's a lot of information that's been passed across these airwaves that are misguided and they're misinforming the people and they're giving mixed signals.
Well, let's correct it. Let's take the time to correct it. Specifically, what are you referring to?
Well, like I say, the hardest hit funds was created to in 2008 to clear and help the banks and the auto industry, and then a couple of Congress folk, men and women, they said, well, hey, we need money to help the people. So they created this fund, hardest hit, $7.8 billion to help the people. Okay, no one was supposed to be turned down. If you could prove that you're a homeowner and you are facing the foreclosure crisis, you're supposed to get this money. Well, the Special Inspector General, her job is to audit fraud, mismanagement of federal dollars. And so the Treasury, U.S. Treasury, that's given the states the money, have no experience in blight. They're just giving millions of dollars to 19 states, including the District of Columbia, okay? And that's what the Special Inspector General argument is. How can you give, in Michigan's case, Snyder and Duggan all this money, and you got thousands and thousands of Detroiters about to lose their home? And in her investigation over 3 years, they found out that the state of Michigan and these other states, the Treasury, they only spent like 17% of $7.8 billion. In other words, the servicers that were supposed to help the people were not helping the people effectively and efficiently. And so for all these folks facing foreclosure in Detroit, it's a shame. And there's something that can be done if we handle our business right. And here's an opportunity where you have a U.S. special investigator saying, hey, give the money to the people. When the money comes to the state from D.C., the state put their brand on it, if you will, and they'll call it, in Michigan's case, Michigan Step Forward Program. And you take a mayor like Duggan, he'll look at it and tell Snyder, hey, look, I got a special project over here. I want to tear down all these houses in record number. The hell with the people. I want to take some of that money and put it over in my special project. And Snyder and his people approved it. And that is what, when you do your research on SIGTARP, that's exactly what the Special Inspector General is saying is wrong with this whole program.
Part of what we had talked about even weeks preceding this broadcast, and I think Mrs. McGee Harvey, you had mentioned that there were actually lobbyists out there that were effectively preventing the disbursement of some of these dollars. And Dr. Wilcoxon, you also had a direct experience with the Step Forward money, as well as gaining maybe some support or urging elected officials to get involved and to force this program to do what it was designed to do.
Well, the hardest hit monies that came into the state of Michigan under Step Forward Michigan dollars, as they came under state control, were intended for a number of reasons. You still have to qualify for them. You can be in financial distress as it relates to your home, but you still have to meet certain guidelines. You have to be unemployed, underemployed, owe back taxes. You have to be behind on your principal for a certain period of time. There are some requisites, but the reports that came out in the state of Michigan indicated that the foreclosure crisis in Michigan had been abated, and as a result of that, there was a I can't think of the term right now, but the funds were redirected, for lack of a better term at the moment. Re-resourced so that they were available for blight removal. Now, that was not the original intent coming from the federal government, but the federal government takes money all the time, as does the state government, and repurposes that money. Sure. If you look at the tobacco money that the state of Michigan got, I don't think very many people who had tobacco-related illnesses received any of that money. They spend that money for anything they want to spend it for. City of Flint, you name the crises, they pull that money out, and the intent, the original intent, gets lost in the mix. So in the state of Michigan, I made the argument that the foreclosure crisis isn't over. If you look at the numbers in terms of Eric Sabree talking about how many foreclosures there are in the county of Wayne, the vast majority of them are in the city of Detroit. So if you see people losing their homes, rather than assist them so that they do not lose their homes, you instead take that money and put it in an account and say, okay, let them lose their home. Once they lose their home, you go in and bulldoze the home over, and we will say that we remove some blight. And I made the argument to Stabenow and Peters' office. I said, listen, the problem is not taking down a home once it's blighted. The problem is finding a way to keep people in their homes so that they don't become blighted. And you make certain that you stabilize communities in the
You really wanna
process.
interrupt that cycle.
So exactly. So you have to look at politicians and what their overall intent is. So yes, the money came into the state for laudable reasons, I think, but it was repurposed.
And so much of what you're dealing with tomorrow, Deputy Chief, will be the issues surrounding how that money was repurposed, and maybe the ensuing scandal that is occurring
question,
as a result.
Richard, it is a scandal. I mean, I've heard so many people say, well, the mayor made a mistake. I even heard the mayor say he made a mistake. But when you look at the background of the people that he have in his administration that is heading up the land bank, you look at their skill set and their professional background, you know that those folks do not make the mistakes that were made. This was by design. And the reason that the mayor is talking now is because he's been called out, he's been busted, if you will.
Now,
and so he's guilty of the Sherman Act.
Ms. McGee-Harvey.
Yeah, and I think also we cannot forget that there is a bigger plan and a bigger agenda. And when I listen to all of the commentaries that all of you guys have made, if we look at the big agenda, which is primarily that gentrification, regentrification is number one, and secondly, that these banks want you to go into foreclosure because they collect everything up front from AIG, a culmination of all of those things, and you come in and you remove everyone originally who's from the community out. You come back in, as they're doing in Flint, no different. When you're raising up these water bills, when you're creating all of these crises where we can't afford, they're coming back into our community. So this is not something just by happenstance or they rerouted the money. We're talking about an agenda that's being fulfilled.
Forgive my terminology, but we're really talking about Negro removal.
Yes,
That's right.
we are. And Richard, let me say this. The people, like I said, that in Duggan's administration, out of his appointees that are making these major decisions and are receiving $250,000 salary, most of them don't even live in Detroit. So the problem is you got these folks making decisions that are affecting the Detroit residents and costing Detroit residents huge amounts of money. Ideally, perfect example, millions and millions of dollars, and those folks making decisions are not impacted by their decisions. So that's a major problem.
Well, tomorrow we all want to tune in. That's
To where?
Again,
At
here
what
at
time?
WHBI Radio TV 33. That'll be between
10
10
to
and
11.
11 o'clock. The name of the you said Progressive Minds or Progressive Talk?
Progressive Talk is sponsored by Progressive Minds.
Got it.
And everyone have your pencil and paper because I got information that you need to write down to help you stay in your home.
Deputy Chief, former Deputy Chief, thank you so much for your call.
And
Have a great
Richard,
day.
I don't think Judge Damon Keith would mind you using the phrase that he coined, which is Negro removal. And I think he coined it back in the 70s when they were removing black folk from Hamtramck. What they were doing was the city administrators in Hamtramck were actually allowing raw sewage to back up in the homes of black people only.
We know that it's a matter of turning the valve to accomplish that
They-
and to
they
be so
d-
specifically in
They
your designation.
deliberately wanted to move black folk out of Hamtramck. So the judge at the time, he was on the Sixth Circuit Court of
My
Appeals.
goodness, that's
He
amazing.
coined the phrase Negro
You
removal.
allow
So
sewage to back up in just
so-
black folks' homes.
and if you allow
In
just
specific
lead,
communities.
if you allow just lead in the water of the residents of the city of Flint, it's not in Flint Township, it's not in even in Mount Morris.
I remember Bill Clinton bombed Croatia, I think it is, and I think it was President Milosevic, I think, in the country, because of ethnic cleansing. And we bombed that country into oblivion, actually. Maybe that's what we're looking
Well,
at.
this is not
in
new.
New Orleans
But-
and in Flint and in Detroit. This whole process of ethnic cleansing,
And if you-
because these people want to reclaim this very well situated landmass.
And if you go back in history, if you look at Hawaii, if you look at Australia, if you look at some other parts of the world, you will know that the people who were indigenous to those areas were actually people of very dark skin. The Hawaiians were dark, very dark. The people in, oh my God.
Australia.
Australia were black, and they bred the blackness out of these people. They actually went in and deliberately bred the
It was
color.
the idea of creating a buffer race.
That's right. That's right.
So
And you have to keep in mind, even in the city of Flint, thus far, since the crisis, we've had 701 people move already.
Wow.
That's not the city of Flint. But then when you talk about the egregious crime that was committed with the KWA, and we're talking about spending almost $600 million on a pipeline that does not belong to us. We're paying for other people's investment. And so MLive comes out with a report about 3 weeks ago to say, oh my gosh, in 3 to 5 years, the average water bill for residents in the city of Flint will be between $300 to $500.
That's
we know that's a fact because
insane.
now we're almost paying $200. And so you get people say, oh, I can't live there. I need to go. You come out with another report to say that Flint has more abandoned homes than any city or township in America. Who wants to live here? Hey, I'm out of there. When you only have one school building that's not leaking, hey, I'm out of there. So it's process that they're doing. This is an agenda that they're fulfilling, not just in the city of Flint, but over in Detroit. Everywhere you go, $100 a day could have prevented this problem with infrastructure and lead. And the governor said we were not worth it.
My goodness. Good morning, caller. You on the air.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes. You know, as you were speaking, my working years are past. I'm retired. But as you were speaking, I said all these things took place during the time when they spent how many trillions of dollars on a war and that they've lost, whatever it was. But they extracted that trillions of dollars from the middle class of people.
That's right.
Okay. Now, when you said the thing about Hamtramck and what they did, where's Hamtramck now? Look at it now. What did they achieve? Okay, but there is a population there that they've moved in. I'm not mad at anybody, okay? But I can see something
I
else
sure
happening.
am. I'm mad. I'll be mad enough for both of us.
What I'm saying, I'm not mad at anybody because people are going to come here. But they're going to be people that are not origins of America and its history. Okay, and I look at it as new money. They're going to be people that won't be able to vote, but they will be able to contribute money for the existence of the system that we have now. When I say that, in other words, you've got people that are buying, that have money, that can't live where they live in countries, and they're moving. They have them moving into Europe. But there's no place for them to live in Europe, so they're going to come here. But they got money. Anybody that can cross an ocean and go to
money.
Europe, the only way you're going there is because you got to give us some money. Okay, and if you come to America, you got to have some money. That is the system that they're putting in place. If you're not going to drink water unless you got some money. You're not going to live there unless you got some money, and sustainable money. That's what I'm saying.
Well, we know
when
that.
I say my working years are gone, so my sustainable money that I can get for services for working for someone is gone. So the money that I'm living on is money that I have reserved for my years going forward. Hopefully, I've educated my family so they don't have to depend on me, that they can have working for them. That is limited. If you look at the workforce, they said on the business news, they said, well, unemployment is down. And it's going to stay down because we don't have in America a growth industry for everybody. College is not as a growth industry. Those are just tools to help you do something else. Okay, and the people that are leading these Republicans, I don't know, and the people that have been duped, because someone is going to pay for all those things. And if you don't have any money, you can't pay. I don't care where you are. But someone is going to pay that bill for that water line, and they're going to have to bleed into the people that are thinking that they don't have to pay. Which is the suburbs of Flint,
Genesee
the
County.
suburbs of Detroit, they're going to have to pay. You can look at it for what you want. That's just my opinion. That's all I came in to say. Thank you very much.
I appreciate you calling. You said so much, and there was so much wisdom in it. I do appreciate your call. Maybe at this point, because we're really close to closing out today. On yesterday, it appeared that, well, I guess it more than appeared, Hillary Clinton will be the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party, the first major party to have a woman who really will represent and has really a great chance to become president if what we've witnessed with Trump, at least over the last week or so, I really thought that he would probably kind of coast in and had really a great chance to win this election. It would be to my chagrin, of course. But it looks like Hillary Clinton is in a great position. And, I guess what I would like to get from the both of these extraordinary women that I sit with on Wednesday, what shift do you think? It's just in terms of women leadership, and not necessarily that being the president, but certainly Dr. Karen Weaver there, and we've witnessed this extraordinary leadership that's really coming out of maybe the opposite gender, if I can characterize it that way. These are the people who are in all of these colleges. These are the people who are getting the necessary skills. This is this growing and evolving population of scholars. That they will all be women, and I'm wondering what does this portend for the future as more and more women became confident and get involved in political life. And either one of you extraordinary women can jump in and take a stab at that if you like. Well, designate one, Dr. Yes,
you know what? Here's what I will say is that for me personally, when I look at the condition of where we are as a people, I'm not putting a lot of emphasis on a female just because that's the gender and I'm yoked to that in spirit and we were born the same, but more so based on the historical way people have voted, they have represented us, as well as whether they are female or male. And so I walk a very, very thin line when it comes to the Clinton, of course, based on historically what I've seen in the past. And even in some of the commentaries of Hillary Clinton. So the verdict is still out for me, regardless of whether she was a female or a male. I would have the same sentiments based on her history of voting, of her inability at times to be honest. It didn't matter whether it was a male or female for me. It matters that you're honest and you have integrity.
But I believe that men are not going to college, for example, and really seeking new levels of of intellectual prowess, actually having a greater understanding of the world and how it works. And is there perhaps a evolving female perspective that we can look forward to? And is there some reasons to be optimistic?
I guess I'm with my sister from Flint. I'm not so optimistic that we have the potential of having a female at the helm in our country.
And maybe not so much Hillary Clinton, but it's just that women are the ones that are picking up the mantle, and they're the ones that are preparing themselves at certainly a greater clip than men.
Richard, you and I both know that unless you want to have, as I perceive it, an honest conversation with me, you probably shouldn't talk to me. When it comes to where we are as women in this country and the elevation of women's issue, I am reminded of the fact that Hillary Clinton's husband, in my estimation, is single-handedly responsible for the decimation of the African American family as we know it. As a result of sending all of our men to prison, and I was one of the first people to make the argument that the omnibus crime bill sent our men to prison, decimated our family structure, and no one had addressed the issue. And I'm still at the point of saying, what are you going to do to re-establish the African American family as a unit? I'm not particularly interested in seeing young women who are coming behind me, because Lord knows I've taken quite a beating as it relates to the absence of the black man in my life. But I'm not prepared to see my young sisters come behind me and try to deal with the family structure alone. That was not intended. In my estimation, being the God-fearing woman that I am, it was not intended that we as women try to shoulder all of this burden alone. And it's very difficult for a single woman, black woman, to pay an electric bill, a gas bill, a mortgage note, maintenance on a home, a car note, car insurance in a major U.S. city alone. We should have the ability to roll over at night as any white woman does and say, honey, I heard a noise downstairs. Will you see what the cause is? Rather than reaching under your pillow, grabbing your own Glock, going downstairs to figure out what the heck is going on. No, these seem like minor issues, but they're not. They go to the core. They go to the core of what's happening in our community. And I have said to black women for some decades now, you can be as strong as the day is long. You cannot raise a black boy to be a black man. You can raise him to be a black adult male. You cannot raise him to be a man any more than a father can raise his daughter to be a lady. He can raise her to be an adult female, but he can't raise her to be a lady. So the needs of the African American woman are only met, from my estimation, when you start with the premise that you're going to help me to rebuild the black family structure. All other conversations are placed on the back burner. When you help me to help my sisters to raise black men to take care of the next generation, then we can have a conversation. You are not going to take a young black male at 12 and 13 when his hormones are raging and have him listen to his mother. Most of them aren't going to do that, and if they do, unfortunately, we have our women raising our men as best they can, and they are raising them with female mentality. So when this male with a female mentality marries another woman with female mentality, you've got the divorce rate at over 50% because you cannot have two female mentalities in a marriage.
Oh, my Lord.
So as the woman on Saturday Night Live would say, don't get me started, because Hillary, when it comes to what we, the African American community, want from you, we want you to start with helping us to undo what your husband did to us. We are not happy with that. That's where I start. So all of this other conversation, in my estimation, we can have it at a later point.
Let me get a
but
caller
that's
in
what
real
Dieta
quick.
wants.
Boy, that is an interesting program. Good morning, caller. You on the air?
Good morning.
Quickly.
I just want to Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Yes, I just want to lift this up to another level. You mentioned male, female. When you're speaking gender, you're speaking of in the physical realm, Richard.
Yes, ma'am.
In the spiritual realm, once a person is in the spirit, in Christ, there is neither male nor female. So it includes all of our consciousness as women. The incision that the experiences we've had will lift us up. We all become sons of God in the Christ mind, and there is neither male nor female. So
All
the
right.
background of the male, his experience will come forth, and our experience will come forth.
Now, you and I both know.
If we were in India, they would even say persistently, even when you talk about into the God realm, they talk about and hold up this idea of a
Into the
feminine,
supernatural spiritual realm,
feminine
we will both be the same.
principle. And maybe that was probably behind my question. Let me just get this other call in. Good morning, caller. You on the air?
Oh my God,
Quickly.
sister, you on fire this morning.
Quickly.
They won't listen to me. I guess you can see that.
Okay, well,
I only got 2
I'm
minutes.
doing a whole lot of professional development because the school systems almost at every level are packed with females, can't deal with these males, and they're constantly sitting in the office, constantly going on to suspension, constantly in school suspension, youth court, et cetera, because we won't come to terms with the fact that Hillary Clinton and her husband were responsible for the decimation of the black family.
Well,
but you know, the slaves don't care. They gonna vote that thing in anyway.
I gotta let you go, Leela McGee Harvey. You're always wonderful. Thank you so much for taking this time with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
My sister, I salute you. Stay strong.
Thank you, and I love your words of encouragement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We love you too.
We're at the time that we must go, and I guess we do have a note here. I have a doctor's appointment, but we got to go. And we'll be back on next Wednesday. I'll see you on Monday. Dr. Wilcoxon, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard. You just got me into a place that I have wanted to go for some time now.